The Vera Show. The Vera Show. The Vera Show. The Vera Show. Let's talk about it. 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 On the field.
Hello, hello, hello. And as always, I am excited. I'm excited about my guests because we are here to embark upon a very, very important, critical, crucial topic. And I don't know what happened to her. We're okay. Hi, Rita, Dr. Rita. How are you? Let me unmute you. Let's see. Unmute yourself. Yes, she's unmuting herself. All right. Well, Dr. Rita, you need to unmute yourself. And while you're trying to figure out how to unmute yourself, let me go ahead and read your bio. Yes. Oh, what happened? Okay, let me get her. Dr. Rita, her bio. Dr. Rita, Senorita Fierro. For 30 years, Dr. Rita Fierro has guided the unpicking of patterns of systemic inequalities. Dr. Rita has a consulting firm that evaluates projects, researches social inequities, and provides processes that illuminate complexity for business, foundations, nonprofits, NGOs, and the United Nations on 4 continents. Dr. Rita facilitates conversations below the surface while honoring deep human longings, sitting face to face with the personal pain of hundreds of people. Dr. Rita has a PhD in African American Studies from Temple University and a master's in sociology from the University of Rome, Italy. Dr. Rita co-founded Home for Good Coalition as to transform systemic racism in our country. So how are you today?
Now that I sorted out how to unmute myself, I'm doing much better.
Good.
Thank you for having me, Vera. It's great to be here.
Yes, I am so happy to have you here because this topic is so necessary. And before we go any further, I would like for you to take a few minutes and just share your journey and share your story and how did we get to you having such a passion for equity. So I'm going to give you the floor now.
So I have there's a lot here, and the story I tell most often is that I remember being 5 years old under the table at a family dinner when I heard racial hatred spoken for the first time. And it was the 80s, and it was a person who was speaking out against a person that they believed had been promoted above them. And it was the person speaking was white. And I remember the vehemence with which this person was saying black, black, black. And every time they said black, it felt like someone had hit me in the stomach. I could feel that there was something profoundly wrong. And I remember being 5 and feeling this is wrong. He should not be speaking this way. So I was a kid in the 80s in New York, and I didn't really have close Black friends, but I had Black classmates. There was this peculiar closeness and distance for which we shared classrooms. It was the busing era. But I had never invited the Black children in my class to stay at my home, or had they invited me to theirs. And so there's this whole reflection that I later did about those years. But at the time, while I'm 5 years old on their table, I felt, I know Black people, they're fine, they're human, they're great, they're my friends, and he shouldn't be speaking that way. Fast forward to 19, another family event, another extended family gathering, and I heard another person speak, in this case we were in Italy against Moroccans. It was very racist commentary that I don't care to repeat. But at that point, by 19, what I had learned how to do was to hide. So while at 5, my discomfort was released the moment in which someone else at the table said to that man, well, if you want to make advance in your career, you need to go get yourself a degree. And that person has a degree. That's why they promoted over you. At 19, I hadn't heard another person hold this person accountable for the fakeness of what they were saying. And instead, I internalized the pain that I felt in witnessing the racist speech, and very much did what I did many times thereafter and before, which was go to the bathroom, cry, and have this just very nauseous feeling in my body and trying to expel it. And I remember that day at 19, I looked myself in the mirror and I had mascara down to my cheeks. And I just said to myself, so Rita, you can't expect people who don't feel it the way you feel it to do anything about this. If you want to change this, you need to do something. And at that point, I committed to this becoming my journey, that I was going to invest the rest of my life to trying to do something to actually change it. You're muted, Vera.
My turn. For you to recognize that at the age of 5, what comes to my mind is the scripture that says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. And at 5 years old, you were already feeling that this wasn't right, and that passion started welling up in you at that time. And then at 19, it impacted you so much that it just brought you to tears, and it literally made you sick. So you are the right person to be here today.
Yeah,
because
there's another piece to this that just came alive as you said that, right? Like God's path for us, which we get to discover. And sometimes we think we create it and we cause it, and sometimes it's been there all along.
yes.
I've told that story many times. The other big piece that's in the middle is that at the age of 10, my parents decided to move from Bronx, New York, to their small town in Italy, where if I had been a giraffe with 2 heads, it would have been easier, right? It was very tough. Italians have a love-hate relationship with the United States. So I was a victim of prejudice, not of racism, but of prejudice. And I really got to feel in my own skin what happens when everyone makes up their mind about you. Like there's just nothing you can do to counter that when, in this case, a town, a village made up their mind about who I was in the world. But interestingly enough, I taught Sunday school at the age of 15. And just today, on the invitation of Pam Perry, right? I asked this person to record a video testimonial of the impact I had on their life. I was 16 when I was I was 15 and 16, and I was teaching pre-adolescence, right? So I was just like 4 or 5 years older than them. And one of the things she said is, because we lived in such a small reality, we're talking about 3,000 people, small town in Italy, but Rita had come from New York. Like, Rita had this whole world she knew and knew what diversity was and was accustomed to being around people from all over the world. She taught us how to not be prejudiced. And I listened to this video today and my jaw dropped because she was talking about me at 16. And yeah, it's definitely, there's an awe, I think, for those of us who are blessed enough to get to midlife, in being able to then recognizing all the strings from where we were to who we are, and realizing that there's no disconnection, right? Like, I spent my 20s obsessed with making the right decisions. Like, I made myself sick over the white perfectionism of making the right decisions at the right time. But if I look back on it now, it's like, it was all perfect all along. Like, every single step was essential.
Yes.
For who I am still becoming, that I haven't discovered yet.
Yes. And we have an audience saying, "Hi, Marlo, glad you're here." She says, "How amazing is it that God put that love in you at 5 years old for a time such as this?" We are living in a critical time right now. Our democracy is truly at stake because of all the hate and all of the injustices and inequality that is going on across the board. And so you mentioned, and for clarification, just to educate the audience, just in case, now this may be elementary, but let's dissect the differences between racism, bigotry, and prejudice.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Vera. I think oftentimes we talk about them interchangeably, and they're not, right? So prejudice means prejudging. It's very much this human thing we do, right? We decide that a chair is only a chair if it has 4 legs and a back. If we see something with 3 legs and no back, we decide it's a stool. But if it has 4 legs and a back, we choose that it's a chair. We don't even sometimes need to even see a picture of the chair. We just need to know that it has 4 legs and a back and decide it's a chair. So when we do that with human beings, and we are not those human beings, what happens is that the people on the outside will often choose elements that are not relevant to the people on the inside. I think humanly, we've all had this experience. We often in the United States talk about it as being boxed in, like someone's trying to put me in a box, right? So when we do it to human beings, it hurts, because basically the observer is saying the traits that I decide are important about you are more important than the traits you decide are important about you, right? So I'm just thinking about, so for me, being a white woman in the work, of course, has become a bigger part of my identity as time has gone by. But there were years in which being a white woman in the work didn't feel like the biggest part of me. If I was playing guitar every single day, then maybe playing guitar felt like a bigger part of my identity than being white in the work. But I often I could get reactions based on being a white woman in the work. Like, that's all you're about. That's all you care about. No, I care about joy and love and nature. And there are lots of things I care about. This just happens to be a big part of my purpose. And so prejudging is what we do naturally. Just when we do it to we do it for everything in life. When we do it to people, it hurts.
Absolutely.
So racism includes prejudice, but racism is about power. And hierarchy. So racist theory says that some human beings are inherently more valuable because of how they look, and that they deserve to hold all the power or most of the power. And so we as white folk, based on those assumptions, have built a society in the United States that favors us. It allows us to live where we want to live, go wherever we want to school, be treated better by police, have better mental health services, better juvenile justice services, have more money, which in a capitalist society in and of itself means that we will be privileged on all fronts because we have more choice. And so racism is this belief that people are inherently superior because of some traits. And of course, it's an absolute myth. And I would argue that it doesn't serve white people either, because we spend our lives trying to prove that we're superior and believing that we will lose the love of the people we love if we don't prove that we're superior. So I believe that racism enslaves us in a different way that it has enslaved people of color who have a pretext of inferiority for the most part. But it enslaves all of us because it doesn't give us space as human beings to be who we are and to choose who we are, which is the whole purpose of life. As we were saying, right? To choose what is our mission, our purpose, and then live it. That's what life is for.
Absolutely.
But knocked in those boxes, we don't get to do that. And bigotry, racism can be subtle, it can be institutional, it can be personal. It has lots of different dimensions to it. Bigotry is one of the dimensions of it that often escalate into racial violence.
Now, there has been some debate. There have been people that say that anybody can be a racist, that Black people can be racist. Can you address that?
Yeah, I disagree. So I would say Black people can be prejudiced, and prejudice, as we said, still hurts. But no, Black people can't be racist, and this is why. So over the course of 30 years studying racism, what I've really come to is that personal racism exists. Personal racism, right? I think you're inferior because I don't like you and I don't like the way you look. As much as that hurts, you can always walk away from a person. What makes systemic racism so pervasive in the United States is that Black people and people of color cannot walk away from the system. And the experience that Black people and people of color have on a daily and moment-to-moment basis is feeling persecuted by all of the system, right? So it's like one day you go to work, your boss loses it because something's happening at their house, but they take it out on you, you lose your job. Yeah. And then you end up not being able to cash a check because you go to the bank and the bank doesn't remember that you have an account there. And then you go somewhere, you're like, okay, screw it, I'm just going to go eat. And then you go eat and someone mistreats you. It's everywhere.
It is.
And it's the experience of one system.
Yeah.
And so white people don't have that experience. So we can get prejudiced again and get our feelings hurt and go home and feel like a bad person and feel like we've been rejected. And that's painful, but it's not the experience of a whole system persecuting you.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't take so little to activate it, right? So I don't remember her name anymore because she's not worth remembering to me. Sorry. The woman that was in Central Park and made the phone call to the police.
Karen. We called her Karen.
She was activating a system already designed to persecute, monitor, and basically destroy Black folk, she was intentionally activating that system against them.
Yes.
So it's not that Black person was going to go home and just feel bad about themselves. Had she succeeded,
right,
that person's whole life would have
changed
overnight. And their whole lineage, right? If they had children, then their children would have had an incarcerated parent. If they had a mother, then they would have been a heartbroken mother, right? So there's a whole network of human beings.
Yes.
That is a lot more. So I would argue that Black people can't be racist.
Okay.
Because
and Darlene,
you don't have that system behind you.
Right. And Darlene, she says, no, Black people cannot be racist. You agree. I agree. But there have been others that have suggested. But like you said, racism exists because of that power ingredient. That's what makes it racism. And it's systemic throughout, institutionalized throughout our country. And Dar also says, we don't have the power to destroy every aspect of someone's life. No, we don't. And that's why this topic is so important. And like I have often said, white people can spend their entire life and never interact or engage with any person of color if they chose to. That is not the case with any person of color. We cannot just isolate ourselves totally and not engage with whites within our life, because we just can't do it. But white people can if they chose to, and many of them do choose to. And I think that is one of the reasons why racism is so prevalent, because we don't take the time to know one another, to experience and talk to one another and share, even in a meal, to get to know the unfamiliar. People fear what is not familiar. And so that has a lot to do with what's happening. I'm going to be quiet and bring it back to you.
Well, thank you for that realness, Vera. And first, I just wanted to comment to Darlene, like, I just got goosebumps. Well said. Like, you said that better than I could have ever put it. And I spent, I don't know, decades, I lost count how long, listening to mothers who lost their children to foster care, Black mothers in Philadelphia who lost children to foster care, listening to their stories and just walking their lives with them. And that's a big part of what they taught me, is that like one event can literally end up like destroying their whole life. And
Yes.
And that, now that I sit with it, I'm like, they would probably not say their life was destroyed, because they're super resilient, incredible human beings. But your life gets shaped around it, right? Like your life gets shaped around, a life can get shaped around the trauma of having a system persecute you. And when a system is persecuting you, there's no way to hide. Which is why I think, like for me, studying African-American history and the African-American experience all those years just taught me to be resilient as a human being, because to me, what African-Americans have survived and thrived through is so remarkable, that studying that history empowered me as a white woman, because it was like, holy moly, if humans can do this, then there are no limits to what I can do. And if I'm just willing to, face the truth and face reality and face myself and move from there.
Yeah.
Oh yes, Vera, to your point about lack of conversation, thank you, Geneva, for bringing us back. I would also say that the way we as whites don't have those honest conversations
And
because
why is that?
we're trained to avoid them, which is what drives you guys crazy. We are trained to avoid them at all costs. That's how we uphold the structure. Now, what I think most Black folk don't know is that we don't just avoid them with you. We walk our whole lives avoiding them. And so that's how I would argue racism hurts white folks and how internalized white supremacy hurts us. Because a person who walks their whole life avoiding a hard conversation, I would argue, isn't an adult, but is a child in a big body. So we don't grow up until we're willing to face ourselves and the hard conversations and the impact of our actions on other people. Our lives are stifled too. Now, because we're privileged, it looks on the outside like we have it all. But emotionally, we're stifled, and our relationships often are pretty poor as well.
Yes, and Marlo, she says yes, and it's a shame. We have to have a group of Black moms who have lost their sons. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was another point that I wanted to make because you had meant, and I just had a senior moment. I have
It's okay.
those.
It'll all come back. It'll all come back, Vera. If it's meant to be, it will all come back.
And we talked, I'd like for us to kind of show the audience and tell the audience about the various levels of racism as was depicted by the Cross and Bennett models. And I'm sure you can even add more to it. There are several levels of racism that people need to be aware of. One is cultural destructiveness, and those are the isms, efforts of elimination, what happened during slavery time, the Holocaust, the Indian reservations. Do you want to say more about that?
I think I also just want to say resident schools have been a huge aspect of cultural and physical genocide of Native Americans. There's a report that, and the reason for mentioning it right now is there's a report that came out in April that Deb Haaland at the Department of State had commissioned and issued on residential schools in the United States and how pervasive was their impact on Native Americans. And it didn't make, surprise, it didn't make frontline news. So Canada's been doing a huge reconciliation journey around the impact and coming to terms to what was done to Native youth. And we haven't begun to scratch the surface. We as a nation, right? Native Americans are very present to it. We as a nation, as a collective consciousness, haven't begun to scratch the surface.
And so when you said that, I want you to repeat what you were saying about the education system with Native Americans.
Is my audio going out?
No, I just want you to be more clear because there may be some that don't understand what that means.
Okay. So oftentimes there is talk about residential schools beginning the 800s, and it was the practice of Europeans of detaining Native American children. And the expression, kill the Indian, save the man, which was said by one of the founders of these Native schools. In truth, residential schools actually began in the 1700s. And basically as a way for Europeans to feel like they were saving Native Americans, while in fact prohibiting the speaking of their language, the practices of their traditions, removing them from the reservation, often by kidnapping them, or it was acts of violence. So Europeans would basically burn down entire villages of Native Americans and then just keep the children. And there's been a huge movement in Canada in the digging up of grounds around historically known residential schools to show how many of these children died under torture. because they died as children. They didn't just go in and integrate, but they died as children in the school. So it was also massive killings and abuse. And unfortunately is very much also what what white folk, Europeans also did in Africa. There's a beautiful coming of age story and of Malido Masome of Water and Spirit, where he talks about living in a colonial school and having been sexually abused by the priests who were running it. And all this was done under religious undertones because, of course, religious supremacy was the father of white supremacy.
And, and that's the other thing. How can you claim to be a Christian and be filled with so much hate? It's an oxymoron. How do you do that? I mean, and why is it that I know that this hate occurs because of the power, and the fear of losing the power. It's killing our country. It is killing us as a nation. And our democracy is truly at stake. So, and I got to take a break and acknowledge my sponsors. So let me do that, and we will be right back to continue this conversation.
If you are a business owner or entrepreneur and you're looking for a way to share your mission, your purpose, your products and services literally with the world faster, safer, and easier, making your brand accessible to millions from the comfort of your home, well, I want to encourage you to join our Learn How to Start a Podcast and Monetize It class. Why? Is because this was designed for entrepreneurs like yourself as a platform to provide you with the knowledge in order to not only start a podcast, but successfully launch it. And then the third key, which is helping you to understand how you can monetize your podcast as you are impacting the world with good. You can also build multiple streams of income from this one podcast and share your story, mission, and purpose literally with the world. So on today, I want you to go ahead and click CoachTinaRamsey.com to join our podcast class today.
Reality today with Ms. Mac Marketing,
a media service business. We help entrepreneurs and startup businesses by providing them with beneficial coaching, resources, and visibility techniques to position their businesses online from their own homes. We assist businesses with influence building, podcasting, intentional coaching, training, media, visibility, connections, and monetization online. CTR Enterprises Network has a proven track record by directly impacting over 1,000 entrepreneurs worldwide. We are here to service you, and we can help. Contact us today by going to ctrenterprisesnetwork.com.
Yes. Special thanks to our sponsors, Ms. Mac Marketing and Dr. Tina Ramsey and her podcast endeavors that can help you become the podcaster that you want to be. All right, now back to our topics. One of the things that we talked about was Christianity. And so I'm going to give you, wait, let me see what our audience is saying. I had that same question, just waiting to ask it. I am 68, and I have always wondered how a person can say that they are Christian, but hate a whole race of people that they don't even know.
So this is a touchy, see, I'm like starting to twirl in my chair here. It's a touchy topic, right? Because religion, of course, is where many of us draw our strength. And spirituality, I think, is really, really important for all of us. Although some of us turn to religion and other people turn to nature, right? Or meditation or question. I want to hear Marlo's question here. Is there a mandate in the country that says that Black has a ceiling as far as the freedom they can achieve, as far as money and status? Great question. I'm going to come to Christianity and then I'll go back to that. So I'm not surprised that many Christians have hatred as embedded in them as they do, because, as I mentioned before, I'll say it again, Christian supremacy is the father of white supremacy. So in the book, Digging Up the Seeds, what I wanted to do was go back into history 500 years to find what was that original seed that was planted that had all the systems be born, right? So I like this analogy of a tree where there are different branches and every branch is a different system. And what I found that at the center of all of these branches, at the center of the whole tree, is the seed of fear. Well, that fear was planted by Europeans coming to the now Americas, exploiting Native Americans, asking them, without Native Americans showing the white people of the time, Europeans at the time, where water was, Columbus would have not survived if Native people hadn't shown them where to find sweet water, right? They only had the water, they only had salt water. They would have died of thirst at bay, at sea, if they didn't know where the rivers were. Native people like provided food, show them up and down the coast, like introduce them to other Native people. So Columbus didn't like explore the Americas on his own. He had guides. And he says this in his diary. But if you read the diaries of Columbus, you also see this very, very strong condescending aspect of being Christian as being superior. And so part of why I think it's really important to dig up these seeds is that anytime we come from a place of superiority, be it religion, skin color, class, we are reinforcing this tree because we are nourishing it through the soil. If we really want to overcome systemic racism and white supremacy, we have to be willing to look ourselves in the mirror and every moment of every day ask ourselves if we are saying what we're saying because we're trying to be superior. And we have to be willing to unlock that. And unfortunately, there's a long history of the Vatican and Christianity supporting the hierarchy of human beings. Like the Spanish, Christopher Columbus was the first who began enslaving in the Americas, and he did it with complete go-ahead from the Vatican. And he was hired to travel the Americas in part because he had already done that in the Canaries, which are small islands off the coast of Africa. So he had already occupied the Canaries, enslaved the local population, and gone back to Europe with some of the enslaved natives. So this was a regular practice in the Europe of the times and was seen as completely acceptable by the church, which was, the Crusades. The Crusades were all about affirming Christian superiority to Muslims. And so there's this whole thing about one God and the way, one God, one only God, and only my way. That is a very dangerous thought. and it's brought a tremendous amount of pain and suffering in the world. And so these days in the United States, when I hear people who are so Christian be so angry, and I point out the same contradiction you're pointing out, like, what have they done to you? Like, doesn't the gospel talk about loving your brother? Like, what is all that about? That doesn't sound like love to me, right? Yet it's returning in some way to a backbone that I would argue is very ancient, very strong, and hasn't been confronted.
So how do we confront? Well, before I ask that question, let's answer Marlo's question.
Oh, that's right. So, forgive me for continuing to hold the book up. The book the book is in colors because I decided that we didn't need to talk about a very depressing subject in a depressing way. And since I love colors, I wanted you all to have as many colors as you could have. So this tree, right? If you look at the fear as the seed at the center, this is too small to see, but at the end of each branch, there's rich and poor. So I would say that our system is designed for the poor to never rise up completely. And this is controversial, but based on my studies and based on what I see that our systems are designed to keep the rich and the poor split and separate. What you were saying before, Vera, about completely two systems of justice. Yes, there are also two systems of education, two legal systems, two systems for mental health, for juvenile justice. Like every single system has this split. And the split started to perpetuate the rights and advantages of the rich over the poor. Those rich began as the British against the local people. And then when the United States freed ourselves from the British, the ruling class shifted from the British to the rich white folk who had pushed the revolution. But the system that had been created where the British would win and the local people would lose because we are a post-colonial nation, those colonial systems stayed. And so where Black folk end in the spectrum then is that Black folk get trapped, whether poor or not, get trapped into the systems designed for the poor. But I would say our systems were designed for the poor to never rise up completely. I have another piece I want to share, which is a little bit on a different note, but by an interesting twist of fate, I think one of the reasons why it may actually work to hold our former president accountable is because our Constitution was designed to prevent an insurrection of the poor. It wasn't designed to prevent an insurrection from the right, but it was designed to prevent an insurrection from the poor. So our Constitution has a number of mechanisms against insurrection. And because of everything that's happened for January 6th in the committee, that's why they're trying so hard to nail and hold accountability, because our Constitution was designed to avoid the poor creating a revolution.
And then we get the white supremacists to do it. And
yeah, which is a fascinating twist of fate.
And on top of that, it was so barbaric. So barbaric. I can't even imagine, even if a group of Black people did decide to do something like that, it wouldn't be like that. It would not be like that. And we would not have come out of the White House at all. We would not have come out of that Capitol alive.
Yes. And white supremacy is barbaric. I would argue, Vera, white supremacy is barbaric. Because what white supremacy does is pull every single white person into our most primal instincts of fear of survival. It puts us in the state of constant panic and fear. Behind that superiority is or pretext of superiority, because of course it's not true, is like a state of total panic. It's like a terrified little child that in face of the world thinks they're going to be annihilated, they're going to be unloved, they're going to be completely disappear. But the reason we believe those fears is because our communities have done that to us. We've had parents who took their love away because we didn't do what they wanted us to do. We've had friends that took their love away because that's how whiteness operates. And so we believe you're going to annihilate us because there are already people in our lives who annihilated us. And that's the wound that we show up with. So it is very barbaric. Very barbaric.
You mentioned when you were on my show before, the difference, and you just touched on it again, the difference between how people of color tend to be raised and how whites tend to be raised. And you talked about the love being conditional based on accomplishments and based on succeeding. So can you touch on that for a minute?
Yeah. Some of this I'm still processing, because I feel like, I mean, of course I do this work on myself. I'm not pointing fingers. Like I have to dig, right? And I have phenomenal, very loving parents. So it's fascinating that like I walked away as a child with the experience of, if I didn't do everything perfect, my parents weren't going to be there for me. Like I would be cast out. Now, if you met my parents, you would think this woman's out of her mind, right? And when I say this, my parents think I'm out of my mind. But it's something beyond person. It's something about this culture of constantly critiquing for perfection, that whether the parents would actually walk away or not, right? I know that maybe before I said they did walk away, but it's an experience of walking away, right? It's an experience of never having grace, that what you did doing wrong is more important, and looking good is more important than who you are. And so basically the way white folk, I would argue that what all white folk are trying to do is still get mama and papa's love. I mean, I think that's at the root of all of it. And so I think what it takes for us to heal as a nation is, yes, this understanding how the system was built and understanding history is important. How do we love ourselves and face ourselves and build our movements from self-love instead of fear? Yes. Overcoming fear in all aspects, yes. But there's also this like deep-rooted work to do of reconciling with our families, with the people who raised us, with where we come from, and being able to feel the love even when it was sometimes distorted. In my experience, the Black folk I know, even if they were hit, even if they like got corporal punishment, their experience was, my mother was hitting me because she loved me. And then as you grow older, you understand that your mother had to be harder on you than society needed to be on you, so that you would walk the line and you would survive. And I think that I'm not condoning corporal punishment, but I think Black children know at their core, they can feel that even the corporal punishment is coming from a place of love and survival. Like, I want you to survive, and so I'm going to be hard on you. In white families, when we get hit because we dared question authority. We get hit because we dared. And this is how we end up upholding the system. We stop rocking the boat. We stop daring because we've been trained to stop daring. Our parents taught us that any questioning of authority was to be punished, as was the failure to perform. White trash, right? Like we say white trash. If whites were inherently superior, there would be no comparison. We wouldn't have to prove it. If we actually were, we wouldn't have to prove it. Instead, we're in this constant rat race to prove that we can get the better job and keep up with the Joneses and have the bigger house and I would argue that at the source of that is because we don't have an experience of deeply belonging to our own, not to a larger community and not to our own families. And that has to get healed. Like, I could not be here saying what I'm saying right now if I hadn't fully reconciled with my family. They are the fuel that allows me to stand for justice the way I stand for justice, because I'm no longer afraid.
That's awesome. Beautiful. You are a beautiful soul. Let me tell you really
thank you,
are.
Vera. I feel the same about you.
Oh.
I'm thankful for your questions that are allowing me to go to a depth that sometimes I don't have an opportunity to do. So, so much gratitude for you.
Well, thank you. This topic is really dear to me because of all the injustices that I've seen and even experienced in my own life, in workplaces and things of that nature, and even serving on boards and seeing it. And we got to do so. We've only got a few more minutes. You're gonna have to come back again.
I'm always open, always ready, Vera.
Yes, because we've got to deal with this. One of the things that comes to my mind is another scripture that says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and heal the land. So let's talk about healing the land. Now, when we talk about this hatred and people understanding the levels, because we started on that and we only got to number 1, we have to come back and focus on this Cross-Bennett model so that people can, within themselves, see where they fall on the spectrum of racism, because there is a spectrum. And we just started with the annihilation, which is the highest yet lowest form because it's so primal. So what can we do? What, as white people, can you do to become allies and support and encourage? And I realize it starts with self. You got to get in touch with yourself. You got to know who you are. And the fact that our country is leaning towards eliminating the true history of this country. They don't want it known, and which again supports what you said about not acknowledging truth, not acknowledging truth. And until we acknowledge that, the truth will set us all free. But I'm going on a tangent. Let me hold them down. Okay.
So what can we do? So I had started saying early in the show, I think there are 3 levels. So the good news is we already talked about 1, right? Which is that reconciling with our families, looking ourselves in the mirror, reconciling with ourselves. And I would say choosing love and connection over fear, learning to choose it moment by moment. The second level is building our movements, our groups, our organizations. If you have a business, if you have a church group, like any group around that. And it's not a before and after, it's a together, right? Because the more I deepen my relationship with life beyond fear, the more I can bring it to the groups. It's sort of like I practice Reiki, which is a healing modality. And I always tell my students, consider yourself as a vase of water. The temptation is that when someone needs help, you would pour the water to give it to them. But the water in the vase is for you. Your goal is to fill yourself up so fully, so completely, that at some point the vase must overflow. That's the water you give to others. You give to others from the overflow, right? So the more we expand our relationship with loving connection, the more we expand our capacity to live not in a state of fear, but make choices from love and connection, the more our communities, our groups, our families transform with us. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but we want to build collectives and communities with love and connection at the center instead of putting fear at the center. Because right now we have a lot of movement building that happens with fear at the center. I would argue that still nourishes the tree. It's still the same soil of fear. And then the wider ring, which is the Home for Good coalition work that we had talked about there, and I know you wanted me to bring on the show, is us doing that in a larger group of folks and doing it among people who understand systemic racism within each of those systems. So there are a lot of people who are doing transformational systems work in the criminal justice system or in the juvenile justice system. I argue that white supremacy keeps us boxed in our disciplines, right? Like, we are all boxed academically into something specific. And that keeps us from having conversations around the whole, and it keeps us from seeing the patterns of the whole. Now, of course, what I did in the book was look at the patterns across a whole country, right? But if you do this city by city, if you do it neighborhood by neighborhood, the patterns we'll start to see are patterns of like how the system operates in the grainy details. And it may change from city to city, or we may see grand patterns that are the same from city to city. But there's a strength in doing it locally, in looking from one place to one place at all the systems and how they work together and how they backlash together when we try to change them. That's the work that I think we have to do moving forward. It's the work that, you know, we've been think tanking for some years, and my vision is to see 1 million people across the country doing this work, 20,000 per state, with this kind of understanding of 10 systems at a time, 12 systems at a time. I think that's the work we still need to do. And what that will allow us to do is also monitor. Because in the 60s, we did the movement building, we did the legislation changing, but we, in particular white people, stopped looking. We decided it was enough and we turned our way. In this case, it's do the movement building, but lean in, look more, look harder, keep paying attention, keep looking for patterns. How is the system changing now? Because systems are designed to backlast and to preserve. So we have to get smarter than it.
Absolutely. And I know in Ohio, I was involved in town hall meetings where we addressed issues. Racism was one of them, education, law enforcement, and health. And having those honest conversations, and people in the community came together. We met at the Civic Center, and we were all at tables having these honest conversations. And that's what needs to be happening across the board. And I want to be a part of what you're doing because it's just so
happy
important.
to have you.
So important. And so I know we've got less than a minute left. I just want to thank you for coming. And I just want everyone to understand it's going to take each and every one of us to do our part to make a difference. And the first thing we need to do is vote. Because if we don't, we will no longer have a democracy. So voting is absolutely critical. I have another comment before we move on. Dar says, I can't comprehend hating anyone so much that it alters my life daily. It can't be healthy. I tell people with the misconception and stereotypes of Black people, especially when it comes to violence, that white people are lucky. We want equality and not revenge. Ooh, we want equality and not revenge. And whites aren't the only group of people who hate us. And it's sad. We are inherently hated by all. So sad. And and I know we're ending, but I had a teacher, one of my professors in college. She was from Puerto Rico, and she was your complexion. And she said to me, I don't understand. She said, if we focused on hating people because of skin color, I would be hating members of my family because many members of my family are your color, Vera. So understanding, and we all bleed red. We all bleed red. So we all need to understand that a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And right now we've got some weak links that's destroying our country. And we each have got to do our part individually and collectively. When you see injustice, say something. When you see a person degrading or treating somebody different, say something. When somebody mistreat you, say something. Make a difference. All right, Rita, we ran out of time, but I'm going to give you the final word, okay? I'm going to give you the final word.
So I feel like I have to say this. It's really important. The work, everything I was alluding to in terms of white folks, our trauma, our pain, the work that is ours to do, was not saying, Vera, that it's for you to do that work or for you to steward that work or that that's on folks of color. It's very much on us. My call is for white folks to get serious about what it takes to build community among whites so we can heal that. That's our work. Folks of color are doing other work that is equally important. I think of racial healing as a bridge. There's the work that white folks need to do alone for ourselves. Let's see if I can get my hand right. There's the work that folks of color need to do alone, and those are the pillars. And then there's the conversations work that you mentioned earlier, Vera. That's the bridge work. If we don't have the conversations, then we have two pillars. We don't have a bridge. If we have the center without pillars, then that's not a bridge either. It'll collapse. We need to there are three elements to the work we do together, and all of that is important. It was really great being with you, Vera. I love how you've woven spirituality and a deep, deep, strong commitment to justice. Yes, voting is super important. And as we transform our relationship with fear and make choices to not live from fear, the culture will shift. You can kill a tree by trying to cut it down, or you can change the soil. If you change the soil, the tree will die on its own. If we change our culture, our institutions will have to change. And given the world we're in and social media and all our communication and podcasts, thank you, Vera. Changing our culture is not as hard as it used to be. It's a lot faster and a lot easier.
Yes.
Great being here. Thank you for inviting me, Vera.
Thank you. And Darlene, she says, exactly, not our job. So she stands in agreement with you. And so, listen, thank you. And thank you, listening audience, for being here. And I'm sure that there will be more listening to this as this podcast is replayed. And I just, again, want to thank you, Rita. And you're coming back because we still got stuff to talk about.
Let's do our next show just on the model. We're just talking about the model, nothing else. I love it because I know you love that model.
Yes, I do.
And do you want to tell people what the model is so folks can look it up?
The model it's actually two different researchers, Terry Cross and Bennett. I can't remember his first name. But they took the model of racism and the spectrum of racism, and they compared each each of those processes. Bennett calls it one thing, Cross calls it another in some cases, but they mean the same thing. So we're going to be talking about that. And it looks at the various levels of racism, because you may say, well, I would never annihilate a person or anything, but there may be another part of it that you find yourself connected to or can relate to. So we're going to be talking about that and looking at how do we resolve that. And Darlene, she says, great conversation, hard but necessary. Yes. And we're coming back to it because it's hard but necessary. We got to change, people. We got to change. Okay. Listen, thank you all for being here. Let's see. We have one more comment. I hope a lot of people hear this message. Thank you, Geneva. Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing. And I want to say to my listening audience, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. And please share this podcast, this show with others. So God bless you all. And you have a wonderful, wonderful remaining week. And if you would just hold on before you leave, Rita. Okay. So thank you all. Bye-bye.
The
Bye-bye.
Vera Tomlin Show. The Vera Tomlin Show. The Vera Tomlin Show. The Vera Tomlin Show. Let's talk about it. 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 Let's talk.